Hello, Mark Fletcher here again. I'm talking about the Knobster. This could be the most important video I've made in a while simply because I suspect the Knobster may be the most misunderstood device in flight simulation. Okay, strong language I know, but from the lack of coverage it gets in the forums and such, compared to what it does for you, I just can't help but believe that people just don't understand how wonderful this little guy really is. I think the misunderstandings come from two misleading sources. SimInnovations, the manufacturer of the Knobster, markets the Knobster as the Knobster for Air Manager, which, if you don't know, is software for instrument panels and such that you can set up on separate monitors for either X-Plane or Microsoft Flight Simulator. And if you're not interested in doing that, you might think the Knobster's not really for you. If you've watched Russ Barlow's video on using the Knobster in VR, unless you've watched carefully, you might think the Knobster running in the plugin KnobXP only benefits VR users. He does state otherwise, but only briefly. The third so-called myth is the price. Okay, at $130 maybe that one's not so much of a myth. I have to confess I swallowed really hard before I made this purchase. But if I had it to do again, I would do it in a microsecond. The truth is, to use the Knobster, all you need is the Knobster and the free plugin KnobXP, and with that setup you can control anything in X-Plane that there's a command for. You'll never again have to try and turn that knob with the mouse. A frustrating experience. I didn't realize how important the Knobster had become to me until I downloaded Microsoft Flight Simulator, which only supports the Knobster and Air Manager. It took me 5 full minutes fiddling around with that mouse trying to turn the FMS knob on the G1000, inputting a simple flight plan, and I said, man, this is not going to work. I contacted Russ Barlow and asked him if there was any plans to port the KnobXP plugin to Microsoft Flight Simulator, and he replied saying that it was doubtful. I was not overly impressed with Microsoft's simulation of nav instruments anyway, so that, along with a few other disappointments, pretty much killed it for me. Alright, sorry for the shameful advertisement there, but I did want to make an impression that this thing really may be something you want. And with the high price tag, it might just take a little extra drama. Let's take a brief look at my setup. Nothing really special here. I don't have or want a sim cockpit, 3 monitors that run X-Plane, and a 4th, sort of a breakout monitor where I run Pilot ATC and other non-X-Plane windows I might want. I have 3 radio panels from Propwash Simulation, which allow me to enter radio frequencies using those knobs. And then of course my beloved CH Products controllers. My computer, which I purchased from Michael Brown, X-Force PC, and then of course the Knobster. For a viewing system I use TrackIR rather than VR because I like to get up and walk around while I'm flying or read websites, things like that, and VR would definitely crimp my style in that regard. As you can see, I've mounted the Knobster on the back of my throttle so I can reach it without removing my hand from the main flight controller. Just like in real life, the advantage of using knobs to enter data is that you can feel for them without looking down, even in turbulence. Turn them accurately and confidently. If you've ever tried to search for something in your car GPS, I know you shouldn't be doing that. You know how hard it is to do. Having a Knobster in that situation would just be the cat's meow. We just got back from a trip and I was thinking, man, if I had a Knobster I wouldn't have to wake my wife up and get her to enter something in the GPS because I could just reach down and feel for it and not even take my eyes off the road. Looking here at the cockpit of the SR22, we need to decide what controls make good candidates for the Knobster. It's easy to overdo it, sort of the if you have a hammer everything looks like a nail, but we're going to control ourselves. In early designs I let the knobs on the instruments dictate what the Knobster controlled, and this led to changing modes more often than I liked, so I redesigned so that I doubled up functions as much as possible and begin to organize based on the procedures I performed in order to increase efficiency. For example, I placed the course bug and heading bug in the same mode, and then decided to repeat the heading bug again, but paired with the altimeter setting, because when listening to ADAS, I could change the altimeter and set the runway heading without changing modes. After setting up my flight plan and then initializing the autopilot, I realized that I always set my cruising altitude with the Alt Select knob, followed by entering the indicated airspeed using the up-down wheel. So I paired the Alt Select and the up-down autopilot functions in the same mode. Since the Knobster was designed after the Garmin FMS knob, it made perfect sense to use one mode for the PFD FMS knob and another mode for the FMS knob on the MFD. Then came the little joystick on the G1000 that pans the MFD map and controls range zoom. It took me a while to come up with a system that worked well for that, but I finally settled on two modes, one to control panning and another for zoom. Finally, I added a mode to control the ignition key and turning the starter. I'll explain that further later in the video. Now, of course, I could have added modes for turning the defrost controls on, fuel switches, flaps, things like that, but I decided it's quite easy and natural to control those with the mouse, so I stopped there. Bear in mind that I've been using the Knobster for almost 2 years now, and I've been paring things down to what I'm showing you today. So let me show you how I've implemented the Knobster in the SR22. The Knobster is designed around what I call the Garmin knob, which is this FMS knob found on the 430, the 530, and of course the G1000. The Garmin knob consists of an outer knob, an inner knob, and a button press function. In the KnobXP window you see what the plugin refers to as modes, and the ones you see here are ones I've customized. I've only got about a half a dozen. And as typical of plugins, there are two joystick buttons you can assign next in previous Knobster modes. And as I click these two buttons, it changes either to the next or the previous mode in the list. And the mode that shows up in blue is the active or the current mode, allowing you to control any switch or knob in the aircraft by selecting the corresponding mode. Looking at this first mode, course heading, I use the convention of a slash where everything that comes before the slash refers to the larger outer or the major knob, and everything to the right of the slash corresponds to the smaller inner or minor knob. So in this case, turning the larger knob changes the course, and turning the smaller knob changes the heading. And I also program when you press the button, it centers the heading on your current heading. This next mode, baro heading, controls the altimeter setting knob with the big knob and the heading knob with the small knob. And notice that I repeat the heading because it's something that I do often, so I wanted to have that on two modes. This is a handy arrangement in that I can listen to ADAS and set the altimeter and the runway heading in the same mode.
Current altimeter is 3009er. Arriving and departing runway 23 left. Raleigh-Durham International Information Papa, 1931 Zulu winds are 237 at 9 knots. 4,200 scattered. 5,000 scattered. Temperature 32.
Alt S up down allows me to turn the Alt Select with the big knob and turn the up down wheel with the small knob. And turning that up down wheel with the mouse is a real blood pressure booster, let me tell you. The FMS mode with the arrow pointing to the left controls the FMS knob on the PDF, and the function is identical to the actual PDF's FMS knob. This alone makes the Knobster worth the high price tag in my opinion, as you get to use the Garmin knob exactly as Garmin designed it. So let's use the FMS knob on the MFD to enter a new waypoint. We start by pressing the knob to turn on the cursor. Then we turn the large knob one click to the right to move to the next line. Then we turn the small knob to the right, and it starts with K because it assumes we want an airport. And being satisfied with that, we use the large knob again to the right to move to the next character, and we just work through all the characters in our ICO until we get the one we want. And the ingenious part is that turbulence and vibrations won't affect us much because we sort of hang on to that knob, and after a while we can just about do this blind, allowing us to minimize heads down. And it's for this reason that I just never used that keypad on the Cirrus. Now let's look at that joystick that controls panning and zooming of the map on the MFD. In the real Garmin, this joystick works really well, but trying to use the mouse to control this thing is a major frustration. Well, once again, the Knobster saves the day. I set up two modes, one called MFD Map Pan, which allows me to pan the map on the MFD left or right and up and down using the large and small knobs. And as you use this, it gets more and more intuitive until it's just second nature. The PFD MFD map range controls zooming. The large knob controls the zooming of the inset map on the PFD, and the small knob controls zooming on the map on the MFD. Finally, since changing modes quickly is such an important function, there are three ways to change modes in KnobXP. You've already seen what I think is the best and quickest way, and that is assigning next and previous to convenient joystick buttons. And using these buttons immediately change to the next and previous mode in the list. Another way to change modes is to just click on the mode in the list using the mouse. And if I'm doing something already with the mouse and I'm nearby and I want to change mode, it's very easy to just slide over there and click on the mode. Use that quite a bit. The third method, which I don't think is as useful unless you have VR, is to press and hold the Knobster button for a second or two. The mode will turn green, allowing you to turn the knob to change the mode, and then you click it again when you hit the mode that you want and it'll go back to blue. The advantage to this is you can do it completely blind as long as you got your hand on the Knobster. But since I have next and previous assigned to convenient buttons on my joystick, my hand is already there, so that's a logical way to do it for me. Now that we've seen how it works, let's look at how to configure KnobXP and a little bit about the inner workings of it. To configure the available modes for your aircraft, first load your aircraft into X-Plane. Then pull down Plugins, KnobXP Settings, and this will display all the available modes for KnobXP. Modes that show up in green are active and will show up in the KnobXP window and are available for selection. If the mode is shown in gray, that means it's available but not active, and to activate it you simply click on it. Then it will show up in the KnobXP window. And to deactivate it you simply click on it again and then it goes back to available. So as you can see, it's very simple to set up KnobXP for any given aircraft. You just go through and select the ones you want. Of course, creating these modes is a little bit more challenging, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later. Now let's configure joystick buttons for the next and previous mode buttons. To do that, we use the X-Plane Settings utility, and just like the typical plugin, KnobXP keeps these settings under Keyboard SI for SimInnovation, Knobster Mode, and the two settings are Select Next Knobster Mode and Select Previous Knobster Mode. When you first install KnobXP, it builds a file structure under Resources Plugins called KnobXP. Inside this directory you'll find another directory named Modes, and that contains all the available modes that will show up initially gray in the Plugins KnobXP Settings window inside X-Plane. Inside the modes directory you'll find lots of useful modes that Russ has created. In order to preserve these files, I recommend you make a copy of this directory and name it something like Modes Library. Then you can feel free to delete or modify anything in the modes directory without any fear of losing anything. Deleting unused modes will simplify the activating of modes inside X-Plane, and I recommend you do that. Another directory you should be aware of is the aircraft directory. In here you'll find files for each of the aircraft you have set up KnobXP for. Each of these files contain the modes that are currently active for that particular aircraft. If you ever feel the need to start over configuring KnobXP for a particular aircraft, you can delete the appropriate file and KnobXP will recreate it the next time you load the aircraft into X-Plane. Now let's talk about creating and modifying the modes. Each KnobXP mode is defined in a file in the modes directory, and they all have the .json extension. A JSON file is an alternative to XML and consists of comma delimited name value pairs. Everything in the JSON file has to be quoted except for integers. Let's take a look at this G1000 Barrow heading JSON file. And as you can see, everything is quoted except for the 10, the 1, and this 101-400, which are integers. And also notice that there's commas after each one of these pairs. And it's important that this structure be maintained, otherwise KnobXP can't read the mode. The first name value pair is the name of the mode. This particular mode is named Barrow/HDG, and that is the name that will show up inside X-Plane. It's good practice to name your file something similar to this name to avoid confusion. The minor _CW CMD defines the command that will run when you turn the minor knob, that is the small inner knob, one turn clockwise. That's what CW means. And in this case, the command that will get run is sim autopilot heading up. And sim autopilot heading down will get run when you turn the minor or the smaller knob counterclockwise. And as you can see, the major knobs, that is the large outer knob, has the same format, and they'll run the barometer up and barometer down commands. The button released command will run a command when you press the Knobster button. In this case, barometer 2992 sets the altimeter to standard pressure when you press that button. These acceleration lines having values 10 and 1 are easier to describe by example. Notice that minor acceleration is set to 10. That means when you turn the small knob quickly, it will advance 10 times its normal acceleration. This makes the heading bug move more quickly when you're wanting to move it a long distance, like to the opposite side of the compass card. And I've found that 10 and 30 are the most useful values for acceleration. Setting acceleration to 1 is effectively no acceleration at all. Now you could leave the major acceleration value of 1 completely out and it still works fine, but I like to leave it in there just to maintain the syntax, and if I ever decide to change it to something else, it's just a matter of making the change. So that leaves this line order. I thought this was a little weird, mostly because there's 6-digit numbers. This integer determines the order the mode appears in the mode window inside X-Plane. Modes with larger order numbers will appear below modes that have smaller order values. For example, for my two FMS modes, my PFD I want to show up first, so I'll make that 101-601, and my FMS mode for my MFD is 101-602. So you can see in my modes window that they show up in that order. Now, word of caution, you can get yourself into trouble if you duplicate these numbers. So what I do if I start fooling around with these order numbers is to load a plane that I don't generally use, like the J3 Cub, into X-Plane, which causes KnobXP to create a modes file in the aircraft directory. This file will contain all of the available modes, including the order numbers, and I can scan down through there and look for any duplicates and make the necessary change in the appropriate modes file. It's unfortunate that KnobXP gets quite confused if there's any duplicates, but I've found this process works quite well. Finally, it's important to maintain the syntax of the JSON file. The curly braces have to be there, as well as the quotes, this colon, these commas. Otherwise the mode will not show up at all in X-Plane. Now let's discuss how to find commands. The best place to start on this is to look at the other mode files, the ones that Russ put in here for examples. There's lots of them. And if you don't find what you're looking for there, you can look in Resources, Plugins, Commands.txt, which is provided by Laminar Research. And these are all the standard commands available as of the installed release of X-Plane. And notice that all of the commands that are provided by Laminar Research all start with SIM, S-I-M. Then there are custom commands for third-party aircraft, and in that case you will need to consult their documentation. Sometimes they provide that with the aircraft. Sometimes you have to go to their website, whatever. So for example, for the TorqueSim SR22, I found in Aircraft X Aviation SR22 series TorqueSim SR22, I found a command mapping.ini file. And in that file are lots of references to custom commands that are provided by TorqueSim. For example, here's a command for fuel pump switch, AFM SR switches fuel pump. Sometimes you just have to be a little resourceful. One last command I want to show you is mostly relevant to ignition switch modes. For example, on the SR22, I have an ignition key mode here that turns the ignition key left or right using either the minor or the major knobs on the Knobster. And as you can see, if you try to start the engine using this, since it's spring-loaded, it just pops right back. Let's look at the mode file for this, and I'll show you how Russ solves this situation. First, we assign an engine start command to the button press function so that pressing the Knobster button will engage the engine starter. Then, to force the starter to hold the start position for a specified time period, we introduce a new command, the button released command force sec. And here we put the number of seconds we want the button to be held in the start position, in this case 5 seconds. Let's see how this works. Now the engine is already started, but you can watch the starter key and see how this works. So I set the key in the both position and I press the Knobster button, and notice how it holds it for 5 seconds. Now the only thing you have to be careful about here is not to hold the button in too long, because if you do, that will change the Knobster mode, which is of course not what you want. Just a quick click is all you need. Well, let me wrap things up by talking about some of the limitations of KnobXP. I have to say it's pretty bulletproof. I have not noticed that the Knobster causes X-Plane to crash. It's no strain whatsoever on frame rates, and it survived the conversion to Vulkan. But there are some limitations, and some of them are pretty irritating. Since this video began, I can hear some of you yelling at me, there are much cheaper ways to go than this $130 Knobster. Well, let me just say, I know that. I've tried a couple of them. I guess it comes down to its lack of gray matter and patience on my part, and I finally decided $130 is a pretty cheap price to pay to avoid the hassle of trying these other options. The bottom line is, at least it appears to me, KnobXP only works with the expensive, that is the version 2 Knobster that's provided by SimInnovations. Of course, I would love to hear from you if you know different. Another limitation is the lack of error reporting. If you have an error in one of your mode files, it just simply won't show up. It doesn't tell you anything, and you have to figure it out yourself. So be very careful when you edit these mode files to maintain the syntax. Just make one change at a time until you get comfortable. It's really not that bad. You just have to be methodical about it. The most irritating limitation of all is if you make a change to one of the mode files, you have to restart X-Plane in order for KnobXP to see the change you made. I have made numerous attempts to overcome this, but I see no way other than reloading X-Plane. And finally, these order numbers need to be friendlier. To start with, they're 6-digit, and if you have duplicates, it does some weird things. But if you do the little trick I showed you earlier about looking in the aircraft file and looking for all the numbers and making sure they're unique, you won't have any problem. Okay, well that's about all I've got on that. I hope if you've not known about the Knobster, or you thought it was something that it's not, that this video will help you to kind of get a better perspective on it. And in case you're wondering, I don't have any vested interest in this. I don't have a personal relationship with Russ or SimInnovations. I just got frustrated with trying to click those little knobs, and I decided I'm going to give this thing a try. And if you're interested in purchasing this and you're inside the US, you might want to know that Michael Brown at X-Force PC sells the Knobster on his website, and you can find a link to that in the description. I wish I had known that when I bought mine, because mine came all the way from the Netherlands and it took several months. Well, as always, I appreciate you watching this video. I hope it's been helpful. Please give me any comments that you have. Hit that like button. I appreciate that. Subscribe if you haven't. Those of you that have subscribed, I appreciate that. That means a lot. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.